Right, so thank you. Look, you saw a video there on some of the issues, and I said during the opening, if you look at some of the issues around the world, it really is creating a lot of problems for us, and particularly us in Asia, because we are the largest manufacturing base in the world. In terms of North Korea sending soldiers into this ghastly war that's occurring, I see that as a significant problem. We are literally on the verge of a potential war. And the outcome of the election in the US is probably going to determine whether there is some peace deal agreement in place or whether that continues. Certainly I think Trump has made it clear what his goals are. I think it's clear on his goals is that he wants to stop the wars around the world, and particularly the ones in the Middle East. So if you look at those tensions at the moment, all of you in the room must be thinking, how is this going to impact the supply chain, if not already? So I'm just going to, just for a hands up, we haven't got a polling system, but just for a hands up, how many of you have actually been impacted by some of the recent events this year? Hands up, those who have been impacted. All right, so maybe roughly around 50%. So for next year, who anticipates that those risks will continue? Hands up. Yeah, a good probably over 50% of the people in this room consider that. And if you remember of some of the issues that went on in COVID, right? We didn't learn those lessons, and certainly TAPA reacted very quickly. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to try and be a little bit thought-provoking, right, to get this conference going, because all of us should be able to take something away after these next 2 days. So thought-provoking in the sense that if you think of what happened during COVID, we all failed. We completely and utterly failed. And we failed because nobody had a plan in place. And the reason they didn't have a plan in place was that in terms of risk assessment, in terms of business continuity planning, nobody had that plan in place. And if they did, it was more on a high level, or it was a disaster recovery plan for your IT systems. Somebody like talking about podcasts. One of the commentators mentioned the other day, supply chain became a buzzword, a new buzzword inside the boardroom, didn't it? After COVID and during the recovery from COVID. But even during the recovery from COVID, we still didn't learn. Look at the mistakes that were made during the recovery. Look at the outage, look at the cost soaring, the lack of planning, capacity, etc. And then, of course, during COVID, suddenly the cyber criminals realised that they could attack the supply chain. The banks have done their hardening, etc. So what's the next best thing? Target the supply chain. It's an easy win, and we are, without calling out those companies who were hit. I think it's all in the media, right? But look at the impact of those companies, not just in terms of loss of business, but the reputational damage and the sort of clean up afterwards. So a lot of what's up here would have been highlighted inside their risk assessment had they done one. And what we realised, what TAPA realised, don't forget, TAPA represents Fortune 500 manufacturers across the globe. If you're not a TAPA member, then please speak to myself. We do, Yvonne's here, Samantha's here, put your hands up please. And consider joining TAPA. We're a non-profit. I'm not paid, by the way, I'm not standing here as a paid person. I am passionate about improving the supply chain. I also sit on the Supply Chain Innovation Network. I was formerly one of the board members of Supply Chain Asia. I'm passionate about improving the world and improving the environment. Okay, so you've heard me talk about the supply chain issues and the disruptions, and I'm not going to read all of these out, but the only way you're ever going to deal with this is look at the problem. Now, let's be honest, how many of you in the room actually do a do a supply chain risk assessment every year without fail, how many in the room do? Hands up. And look, there isn't many people that do it, and it's not necessarily your fault. It's because it's never been driven down from the top. And what I'm saying to you today, if you do your risk assessment properly, you can build zero failure supply chains. Now, remember, those of you who came here last year, you would have seen me talk about that, about how I went into automotive industry. And you know, automotive, we're talking about just in time. Is just in time going to be out of date? And automotive is just about just in time. It's an inventory, the inventory pressures for a US listed company. So we have all of those pressures of holding too much inventory. And you would have heard me talk about how I went into when I was told, when I took up the role, bring your fire suit. And they weren't wrong. Literally, I had to have a fire suit. I was just going from one fire to another fire to another fire. And what I realised in that process is that you can run around, you can pick up your air miles, your hotel points, you can have no sleep, you can come home absolutely tired, but you're never going to fix a problem. You're never going to fix the root cause of the problem unless you do things differently. And then this is why I transformed it, and I said to everyone, look, we have to do a risk assessment. In manufacturing, when we have a failure, we have the 5 whys. Let's start using the 5 whys on all of these issues. Put that into a structured process, and then let's categorize, and then let's prioritize. And as we did that, we started reducing all of the failures. To the point that in 2015, I was already using AI to predict failures within the supply chain. And my team were great. All I did, I just gave the leadership, I gave the direction, and my team did it for me. I have got no IT background yet. I'm involved, I love IT. For me, it's logical. So, gave the team the vision, they picked it up and ran with it, and we solved the problems. Now, suddenly, we were now using that as a competitive edge over our competitors, right? We were going into those automotive companies, you go into the Japanese, and the Japanese, as you know, do not want to lose face, internally, externally. But when you say to the Japanese, this is what I put in place to prevent an issue, a failure, then they look at you differently, and that's how we will bring in more business. If you look at what's happening, you saw, many of you will probably know Apple, Samsung are really taking the lead in moving out of China. I don't want to keep talking about leaving China because it's something that's been spoken about for a long time. But they're going to places like Vietnam, going to places like India. Do you think that India hasn't got labour issues? Do you think that Vietnam hasn't got labour issues? You haven't got supply chain issues? Of course you have. But how many of those companies, because don't forget they're dragging all their manufacturers, tier 1 manufacturers with them, how many of those companies actually have done a risk assessment on that business? And if they did so, they would identify issues which they need to talk about in the boardroom. If I just ask, out of all the supply chain leaders here, how many of you actually sit on the board? Yeah, I used to. But I only sat on the board because my original CEO at the time felt that supply chain should have a seat at the table. And it's wrong. When you look at your expense, if you look at your procurement, at the time, 77% of the cost was in purchasing and logistics. And that's why he wanted us to have a seat at the table. But in many companies, he could be reporting to operations. I've heard of some companies now even reporting into legal, would you believe, which I find incredible. Some reported into finance. So the supply chain was never ever sitting inside the boardroom. So how can you ever raise up some of these issues in a proactive way? And look, the head of NVIDIA, he's got 65 direct reports, and you kind of think, when you listen to him talk, you kind of think, hey, this guy's a control freak. But when you hear the rationale of why he has 65 people reporting him, when he cascades something down, he wants it to be 100% to all of his staff. He doesn't want it watered down, and that's the danger, isn't it? The danger, isn't it? And what happens to the supply chain? Who wants to talk about a problem in the boardroom? Nobody. Because you're worried you're going to get shot. And I'll talk about consultants later on this afternoon. Sometimes that's why it's always good to have a consultant sending the message. So in terms of everything we're doing here, if you haven't got a seat at the table, if you're not trying to push your way up the food chain, it's a difficult task. All right, so we have all of this new technology coming along. The AI buzz is here, even though many of us have been using it for an extremely long time and getting actual good results from it. But if you look at the future of AI, it's actually terrifying. It's terrifying what it can do and what it will do to mankind. And I agree with Elon Musk. There's got to be controls put in place, and not every country will want to put controls. People will want to use it as a tool to gain power. But we know within business, it can solve a lot of problems very fast. But what does it mean for your planning teams? We're just talking about that. It means that probably 50% or maybe 75% of your planning teams will disappear. You only keep the top 25, the ABC players. Keep your A players, and the B's and the C's will be scratching around looking for another job. So there's a lot of things that we need to take into account, risk in this changing world. Growing counterfeits, if we're not already in a recession, nobody wants to admit they're in a recession. I think you can all make up your own mind on that. You've all seen some of the layoffs that some of the high-tech companies are having, and some of the numbers which are being published, not just locally but globally. Amazon laying off 14,000 mid-level managers. That's scary, isn't it? 14,000 mid-level managers across the globe. Why is that? Is that because of automation? Is that because of business? Because, those of you who've done the A.T. Kearney studies, you employ A.T. Kearney, and they will talk about the basically like in NVIDIA, where you have everyone reporting into one person, and then you take out the rest of the management as a way of cost saving. So, the future is going to bring a lot of problems for us. And all of you that are not using AI now, get into AI, because if you're not part of it, AI will eventually take over. So what does it mean? It means that things are going to change so much. As we go into recession, what happens in recession? The counterfeit market starts to increase. And counterfeits happen in a number of ways, and TAPA is also addressing that issue. And if we look at what's been lost in terms of supply chain disruption and theft within supply chain, it's a lot of money. One manufacturer of computers who were losing something around 16 million a year just on theft. But interesting enough, in terms of counterfeits, they were losing billions. The analysis showed that they were losing market share. The analysis also showed that they had to honour warranties on some of the products because they couldn't prove the products were not sold by them. And of course, the people counterfeiting know that you can inject these products into the supply chain, and you take out the genuine ones and sell the genuine ones elsewhere. So, the point is, why do you need a risk assessment, and why do you need a business continuity plan? Because remember what I said, during COVID we saw that nobody really had a plan.
So the risk assessment process is a structured process which is designed for every single stakeholder within the business to identify those risks, identify some of the things I'm talking about, including the technology change. Because unless we start looking at technology and the impact that it's going to have it on our staff. What does it mean? How are we going to manage that going forward? Look at the resistance. Those of you who have done digitization projects, how many in the room have had strong resistance from the team? Yeah. And let's be honest, right? You can see why there's strong resistance. So everyone was digitized for the right reason. I was digitized back in 2015. And what I was able to do was to digitize, and as we brought on new programs, we did not have to increase our headcount with new programs coming in. These programs are multi-million-dollar programs. So what does that mean? It means that we could do more with less, and that's the advantage of the digitization, and certainly AI is going to help us do that. But in terms of your risk assessment, unless you're starting to look at all of those risks, not just on terms of your upstream planning, your downstream planning, and some of the issues that we've spoken about and we will continue to talk about today, but also on the impact on technology and the impact it's going to have on your team and the impact that it's going to have on you rolling out a plan. Because one of the things that I do, the lessons that I've learned, is that when you're trying to roll things out, you'll have 30% that will buy into it, you'll have 30% that need to think about it, you'll have another 30% who will do everything possible to slow that whole thing down. And they will use every single reason to stop the program. Okay, so in terms of that, then how do you then design a business continuity plan to overcome those issues of the supply chain? Because had you had those plans in place, had the world had those plans in place previously, we wouldn't be in such a mess that we are now. So we were shipping from Cebu where we had 3 manufacturing plants into Japan, Thailand, Korea, and the US. We had zero failure supply chain, and that's because we did a risk assessment. We went down leg by leg, point by point, and we looked at every single risk, and we had a plan for every single part of it. Nissan loved us. GM loved us, Ford loved us. We even had relationships with the LSPs that to the point that we even got containers shipped from one alliance across to another alliance. And you can only do that through relationships. And that's why I always say, always engage your LSP as a partner, and never as somebody who is just a provider. If you haven't got that level of engagement, as you saw during COVID, if you didn't have that level of partnership with your LSP, hey, you were just one of the ones who were going to get hit with the heavy increases and some of the rates that were given. Okay, so I'm just going to higher up a bit. So in terms of enhancing and creating that transparency in your supply chain, what TAPA also does, we map all of the cargo incidents across the region, and you can use those for your risk assessments. So get your teams involved in TAPA, get them trained in TAPA, get them trained on how to audit, how to make sure that you have in your contractual requirements with your logistics providers. And I'm going to put a list up here. It's not a comprehensive list because in Asia alone we've got over 750 big players. We'll see some of the big players coming up. But you have that in your contractual requirements that they have to follow your plan. And if you do that, you will start to reduce your failures in the supply chain. When they have a problem, they have to, contractually, they have to notify you. And depending on the product or the service, you can make that time that that's through 4 hours. If anyone has ever worked for Intel, anyone been a supplier of Intel? because Intel, I've got to say, probably were one of the best in the market of sewing contractual requirements together. It was back-to-back, so watertight. If you didn't follow, then you could expect to receive an invoice. So, use all of these tools, okay, to secure your supply chain. As you do, you'll find that your operational process will improve dramatically, okay? I've got to speed up here, but I'm talking later on during the panel, so I'll go over. And look, these standards are not ISO for standards' sake. These tools are actual tools. This is, TAPA is not another ISO. Don't think of that. These are products which are prescriptive. You put them into your terms and conditions. Right, here's some of our members, okay? Now these companies, all of these companies achieve a lot from TAPA. They achieve a lot from TAPA because already they're putting all these risk processes in place. They're training their people, okay? They're training their people, developing them, and these tools are paying off. Now, if I can get to zero failure, everyone else here in the room can do that. And the way to do that is to use these tools, and these are some of the companies out there that are actually doing it. Okay, so look, I'll finish up because I hope I've given you some ideas for the rest of the day. You can scan the barcode there to come to the site. I'm around, so please come and grab my card. You've got the rest of the team here. Come and get to know them. But before I finish, hopefully what I've done is give you some ideas of what we should be thinking about today, what we should be discussing. Because these issues are not going to go away. And hopefully all of us will leave the conference tomorrow and walk away with some really, really good knowledge of what we can do as a team going forward to improve our supply chains. So thank you very much.